Cold-blooded bikers corner a helpless old man. When they learn who he is, they freeze. The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a golden glow over the rows of modest houses and tree-lined streets. It seemed like an ordinary evening, the kind where families gathered for dinner and children played in their yards. But in an alley just beyond the main road, something unusual was unfolding. A group of bikers, clad in black leather jackets and helmets, roared into the narrow alley on their roaring motorcycles. Their presence was loud, aggressive, and intimidating. They weren't the type to come around asking for directions or offering a friendly wave. They came to make a statement. Their leader, a tall, burly man named Rex, stepped off his bike, his heavy boots thudding against the asphalt. The rest of the gang followed suit, their eyes scanning the alley with predatory intent. It wasn't long before they spotted their target, an elderly man shuffling along the alleyway, seemingly oblivious to their presence. The man, dressed in a faded blue shirt and a well-worn vest, was carrying a small canvas bag in one hand and a walking cane in the other. He moved slowly, as if each step took deliberate effort. His weathered face and silver hair marked him as someone well into his 70s, if not older. Rex smirked, signaling to the rest of the gang to spread out and block the man's path. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. What do we have here? Out for a little evening stroll, Grandpa? The old man stopped, glancing up at the group with calm, measured eyes. He didn't seem afraid, but he also didn't look amused. I don't want any trouble, he said, his voice steady but firm. Rex let out a laugh, a deep, menacing sound that echoed through the alley. Trouble? We're just here to talk. Right, boys? The gang chuckled, their voices blending into a low rumble. They inched closer, tightening the circle around the old man. One of them, a wiry guy with a scar running down his cheek, reached out to grab the man's bag. Let's see what you've got in here, old-timer, the biker sneered. Before his hand could reach the bag, the old man stepped back, his grip on the cane tightening. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he said, his tone laced with quiet authority. The gang burst into laughter, clearly unimpressed. Rex took a step closer, towering over the man. And what are you gonna do about it, huh? Wave that stick around? The old man didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the group. For a moment, the air seemed to shift, the light-hearted mockery in the biker's laughter fading into something more uneasy. Rex, eager to maintain his dominance, reached out to shove the man's shoulder. But before his hand could make contact, the old man moved with surprising speed, pivoting on his heel and using the cane to sweep Rex's legs out from under him. The gang leader hit the ground with a heavy thud, his helmet skidding across the pavement. The alley went silent, the rest of the gang staring in stunned disbelief. The old man straightened, his cane now resting lightly against the ground. I warned you, he said simply. Rex scrambled to his feet, his face red with anger and embarrassment. You're gonna pay for that, old man, he growled, lunging forward. But this time, the old man was ready. With a swift motion, he sidestepped the attack and used the cane to strike the back of Rex's knee, sending him crashing down again. The gang hesitated, their confidence shaken. This wasn't the helpless victim they had expected. The old man moved with a precision and grace that suggested years of training they couldn't quite place but instinctively respected. One of the younger bikers, clearly nervous, stepped back and muttered, "Who the hell is this guy?" The old man turned to face the group, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. "My name's Henry," he said, "and I'd suggest you walk away before you regret this." For a moment, it seemed like the gang might comply. But Rex, unwilling to let his pride take another hit, barked, "Don't just stand there. Get him." The bikers hesitated, then moved forward as a group, their numbers giving them courage. But Henry didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his grip on the cane and took a defensive stance. The first biker to reach him swung a punch, only to find his arm expertly deflected. Henry used the momentum to twist the man's wrist, forcing him to drop to his knees with a pained cry. Another lunged at Henry from behind, but the old man spun around, delivering a sharp jab to the attacker's ribs with the end of his cane. The man doubled over, gasping for air. One by one, the bikers fell, each attempt to overpower Henry met with precise, calculated counters. Despite his age, Henry moved like a seasoned fighter, his every motion efficient and deliberate. Within minutes, the gang was on the ground, groaning and clutching their injuries. Rex, still on his knees, stared up at Henry with wide eyes. "What the hell? Who are you?" Henry leaned on his cane, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I've seen my share of fights," he said. "And I learned a long time ago that it's better to avoid them whenever possible." As the gang struggled to their feet, Henry reached into his canvas bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. He tossed it onto the ground in front of Rex, who hesitated before picking it up. The headline read, "Retired Special Forces Colonel Honored for Lifetime of Service." Rex's hands shook as he read the article, his face going pale. The story detailed Henry's decades of service in the military, his expertise in hand-to-hand combat, and the countless lives he had saved during his career. "You're that Henry?" Rex stammered. Henry nodded. "That's right. And now you understand why I said you'd regret this." The gang exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado completely gone. Rex swallowed hard, then nodded. "We didn't mean anything by it. We'll go." "You'll do more than that," Henry said, his voice firm. "You're going to leave this neighborhood alone. No more intimidation, no more trouble. Do I make myself clear?" Rex nodded quickly. "Crystal?" With that, the gang retreated to their motorcycles, their movements hurried and clumsy. As the roar of their engines faded into the distance, Henry sighed and adjusted his cane. Henry watched the bikers disappear down the alley, the sound of their engines fading into the evening air. He stood there for a moment, leaning on his cane, letting the stillness settle back into the neighborhood. His body felt the strain of the encounter. Age had its way of reminding him that he wasn't the soldier he once was, but his mind was sharp, focused. He glanced down at the discarded newspaper Rex had dropped. The photo on the front page showed him in full military dress, shaking hands with a high-ranking officer at a ceremony from years ago. It was a life he rarely spoke about now, one that he had left behind in hopes of finding peace. "Still causing trouble, Henry?" A voice called out from the entrance of the alley. Henry turned to see Martha, his longtime neighbor, standing with her arms crossed. She was a spry woman in her late 60s, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She had known Henry long enough to recognize the signs of a confrontation. "Just a little misunderstanding," Henry said, offering a faint smile. Martha approached, glancing at the scuffed pavement and the dropped items left behind by the gang. "Doesn't look like much of a misunderstanding to me. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Henry replied, adjusting his grip on his cane. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Martha sighed, shaking her head. "You always say that, but one day someone's going to push too hard, and you're not going to be able to handle it." Henry didn't respond. He knew Martha meant well, but she didn't understand. For someone like him, walking away wasn't always an option, not when others were at risk. "Let's get you home," she said, motioning toward the street. "I'll make you some tea." Henry smiled faintly. "Tea sounds good." The next morning, Henry woke early, his muscles stiff from the previous night's events. He went about his usual routine, making a simple breakfast and tending to the small garden in his backyard. The birds chirped in the trees, and the sun cast a warm glow over the neighborhood. It was peaceful, exactly the life he had wanted after years of chaos. But as he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter with the bikers wasn't over. Men like Rex didn't back down easily, even when faced with someone like Henry. He had seen it too many times before. Pride and anger could make people do reckless things. By midday, his instincts were proven right. A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he found a young man standing on the porch, his leather jacket identifying him as one of the bikers from the night before. But unlike the others, this one seemed different. He wasn't sneering or puffing out his chest. He looked nervous. "Mr. Henry?" the young man said hesitantly. Henry's grip on the door tightened. "What do you want?" The biker held up his hands, palms out. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to talk to you." Henry studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." The young man entered the modest home, glancing around awkwardly. He looked out of place, like a kid who had wandered into a stranger's house by mistake. Henry motioned for him to sit at the kitchen table and poured him a glass of water. "What's your name?" Henry asked, his tone calm but firm. "Tommy," the young man replied. "I was with the gang last night." "I remember," Henry said. "What do you want, Tommy?" Tommy fidgeted with the glass, his eyes downcast. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what happened. I didn't want to be there, but Rex, he doesn't give us much of a choice." Henry leaned back in his chair, studying the boy. "Rex is your leader, isn't he? Why do you follow him if you don't agree with what he's doing?" Tommy hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't have anywhere else to go. My old man kicked me out when I was 17, and Rex took me in. He said the gang was like a family, but it's not what I thought it'd be. I'm tired of it, but I don't know how to get out." Henry's expression softened. He had seen this story before. Young men caught in the orbit of dangerous leaders, looking for belonging in all the wrong places. "Leaving won't be easy," he said. "But it's possible." Tommy looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," Henry replied. "But it starts with a decision. You have to choose to walk away, no matter how hard it gets." Tommy nodded slowly, as if trying to summon the courage. "I want to leave. I don't want to end up like Rex." Henry leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then you'll need help. And I can offer it, but you have to be willing to do the work." Tommy's eyes widened. "You'd help me?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Henry said. "But you have to want it?" Over the next few weeks, Henry worked with Tommy, helping him find a job and a place to stay. It wasn't easy. Breaking free from the gang's influence came with its own set of risks. But Tommy was determined, and Henry admired his resolve. Meanwhile, word of Henry's encounter with the bikers spread quietly through the neighborhood. It wasn't long before people began to approach him, asking for advice or help with their own struggles. Henry had spent years avoiding attention, but now he realized that his skills and experience could still make a difference. One evening, as Henry walked home from the corner store, he spotted a familiar figure waiting near his gate. It was Rex. Henry's hand instinctively tightened around his cane, but he kept his expression neutral. "What do you want?" Rex stepped forward, his posture less aggressive than before. "I came to talk," he said. "No tricks, I swear." Henry nodded cautiously. "All right." Rex looked down, his voice quieter than Henry expected. "I've been thinking about what happened. About what you said. And maybe you were right. I've been running this gang for years, but it's not leading anywhere. I don't even know why I started it anymore." Henry studied the man, searching for signs of deceit. But Rex's shoulders slumped, his usual bravado replaced by something that almost resembled shame. "What do you want to do about it?" Henry asked. Rex hesitated, then said, "I don't know. But I think it's time to change." Henry's expression softened, and he nodded. "It's never too late to start over, Rex. But it's up to you to make that choice." For the first time, Rex didn't have a snide remark or a deflection. He just nodded, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. As Rex walked away, Henry stood by his gate, watching the man disappear into the night. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. For Rex, for Tommy, and even for himself. But for the first time in a long time, Henry felt a sense of hope. Because change, as he had learned through his own life, always began with a choice. Days turned into weeks, and life in the neighborhood settled back into its familiar rhythm. Henry resumed his quiet routines, tending to his garden, reading on his porch, and occasionally helping Martha with repairs around her house. But beneath the calm exterior, something had shifted. The events with the bikers had set in motion a ripple effect, one that Henry hadn't entirely anticipated. Tommy, now working at a local hardware store, stopped by Henry's house regularly for advice or simply to talk. At first, their conversations were practical: how to budget his paycheck, how to handle his coworkers. But over time, they grew more personal. "I never really had anyone to look up to," Tommy admitted one afternoon as they sat on the porch. "Rex made it seem like being tough was all that mattered. But you've shown me that there's more to life than that." Henry smiled faintly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's not about being tough, Tommy. It's about being strong. And strength comes from doing what's right, Even when it's hard. Tommy nodded, the words sinking in. He had started to believe in himself in ways he never thought possible. And though he still carried the weight of his past mistakes, he felt lighter with each passing day. Meanwhile, Rex's journey was proving to be more complicated. The gang had begun to splinter in his absence. Without his leadership, rivalries and infighting emerged. Rex had spent years cultivating an image of power and control, but now that he was questioning his own path, he struggled to reconcile his past actions with the man he wanted to become. One evening, Rex showed up at Henry's door. His leather jacket was gone, replaced by a plain sweatshirt, and his usual swagger had been replaced by uncertainty. "Henry," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Can we talk?" Henry stepped aside, motioning for Rex to come in. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken tension. "I don't know how to fix this," Rex admitted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "The gang's falling apart, and I don't even know if that's a bad thing. I've spent so much time being someone I'm not sure I can change." Henry studied him for a moment, then leaned forward. "Change isn't easy, Rex. It's messy and uncomfortable, and it takes time. But it's possible. The question is, what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" Rex exhaled slowly, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "I don't know. But I don't want to keep living like this." Henry nodded. "That's a start. And if you're serious about it, I'll help you. But you have to be willing to put in the work." Rex looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You do that? Even after everything?" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Henry said. "Even you." With Henry's guidance, Rex began the slow process of dismantling the gang. It wasn't easy. Many of the members resisted, clinging to the power and identity the gang provided. But Rex, bolstered by Henry's mentorship, stayed firm. He reached out to local community leaders, offering to help transition gang members into legitimate jobs and programs. Tommy played a key role in this effort, using his own story as proof that change was possible. Together, he and Rex convinced several former gang members to join a job training program at the hardware store where Tommy worked. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. One evening, after a long day of outreach, Rex joined Henry and Tommy on the porch. The three men sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of crickets filling the air. "You know," Rex said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd end up here. Sitting with you too, trying to do something good." Henry chuckled softly. "Life has a way of surprising us." Tommy grinned. "I think we're all better for it." Rex nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't realized he was missing. Word of Henry's impact spread quietly but steadily. People in the neighborhood began to see him not just as a retired old man but as a mentor, a guide, and a pillar of the community. Young men and women who had felt lost or stuck began seeking him out, drawn by his wisdom and steady presence. Henry, for his part, was careful not to take on more than he could handle. He knew his limits, both physical and emotional, and he made sure to carve out time for himself. But he also couldn't ignore the sense of purpose he felt in helping others. One day, Martha stopped by with a basket of fresh-baked cookies. As they sat on the porch, she smiled at him knowingly. "You've become quite the neighborhood hero, you know?" Henry shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm no hero, Martha. I'm just doing what I can." She reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't sell yourself short, Henry. You've changed lives, mine included." Henry looked at her, surprised. "Yours?" Martha nodded. "Watching you has reminded me that it's never too late to make a difference. I've started volunteering at the community center again. It feels good to give back." Henry smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had always believed in the power of small actions, but seeing the ripple effects firsthand was humbling. As time went on, the neighborhood transformed. What had once been a place marked by tension and fear became a community defined by connection and hope. Henry's porch became a gathering spot, a place where people could share their struggles and dreams without judgment. And though Henry often downplayed his role, those who knew him understood that he was the catalyst for it all, a man who had turned a moment of conflict into a lifetime of change. The changes in the neighborhood were subtle at first, but over time, they became undeniable. People began to walk with more confidence, greet each other more warmly, and offer help when needed. The transformation was the result of countless small acts, like Henry's quiet mentorship, Rex's efforts to dismantle the gang, and Tommy's determination to rebuild his life. One particularly transformative moment came when Rex decided to host a neighborhood cleanup day. It was an idea Henry had suggested during one of their late-night conversations. "If you want to show people you've changed," Henry had said, "you have to give back. Actions speak louder than words." Rex had taken the advice to heart. He reached out to local businesses, community leaders, and even former gang members, inviting them to join the effort. To his surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. On the day of the event, dozens of people showed up, armed with gloves, trash bags, and a sense of purpose. Henry watched from his porch as neighbors of all ages worked side by side, cleaning the streets, planting flowers, and painting over graffiti. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not just for Rex but for the community as a whole. Rex, now wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual biker gear, approached Henry with a smile. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the bustling scene around them. Henry nodded, his expression warm. "I think you've done something good here, Rex. Something real." Rex looked out at the crowd, his eyes lingering on a group of kids laughing as they painted a mural on a nearby wall. "It feels good," he admitted. "Better than I thought it would." "That's because it's genuine," Henry said. "And people can see that." As the cleanup day came to a close, the neighborhood gathered in the park for a barbecue. It was the first time in years that so many people had come together, and the atmosphere was electric. Music played from a portable speaker, kids ran around chasing each other, and the smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs filled the air. Tommy manned the grill, a grin on his face as he flipped patties and handed out plates. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this," he said to Henry, who stood nearby. "Feels like a different life." Henry chuckled. "That's because it is, Tommy. You made the choice to start fresh, and now you're seeing the results." Tommy's smile grew. "Thanks to you. I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't stepped in." Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the hard part, Tommy. I just pointed you in the right direction." Nearby, Rex was deep in conversation with a group of local business owners. He had taken it upon himself to find ways to support the neighborhood's economic growth, offering to help connect people with resources and opportunities. It was a far cry from his days as a gang leader, and the change hadn't gone unnoticed. One of the business owners, a woman named Linda who ran the local diner, patted Rex on the back. "You're doing good work, Rex," she said. "The neighborhood needs people like you." Rex looked down, a hint of embarrassment in his expression. "I'm just trying to make up for the damage I caused." "And you're succeeding," Linda said firmly. "Don't sell yourself short." As the sun began to set and the crowd started to disperse, Henry found himself sitting on a bench with Martha. They watched in comfortable silence as the last of the volunteers packed up their supplies. "You know," Martha said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd see the neighborhood like this again." Henry nodded, his gaze fixed on the park. People just needed a reason to come together. Sometimes, all it takes is a little push. Martha smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "And you were that push, Henry. Whether you like to admit it or not." Henry chuckled softly. "Maybe, but it's not just me. Everyone here played a part." As they sat there, Henry's thoughts drifted to his past. He had spent so much of his life in the shadows, doing work that was necessary but often thankless. He had never sought recognition or accolades, only the satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. And yet, sitting here now, surrounded by a community that had found new hope, he realized that this was the most meaningful work he had ever done. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Rex continued to dismantle the remnants of the gang, helping those who wanted to leave and cutting ties with those who refused to change. It wasn't easy. There were moments when he questioned whether he was doing the right thing, moments when the weight of his past threatened to pull him back. But every time he felt himself faltering, he thought of Henry's words. Strength comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard. Tommy, now fully settled into his new life, began volunteering at the local youth center. He saw himself in the kids who came through its doors, lost, angry, and searching for a sense of belonging. He shared his story with them, hoping to show that it was never too late to turn things around. One evening, as Tommy was locking up the center, a teenage boy approached him. The boy, whose name was Marcus, looked nervous but determined. "Hey," Marcus said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course," Tommy replied, leaning against the doorframe. "What's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated, then said, "I've been hanging out with some guys who aren't good for me. I want to stop, but I don't know how." Tommy's heart ached for the boy. He saw so much of himself in Marcus, someone who had made bad choices but still wanted to do better. "It's not easy," Tommy said, "but the fact that you want to change means you're already halfway there. And you don't have to do it alone." Marcus nodded, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thanks, Tommy." As Marcus walked away, Tommy felt a deep sense of purpose. He had found his calling, not just in rebuilding his own life, but in helping others do the same. Henry's porch had become a hub of activity, a place where people came to seek advice, share stories, or simply enjoy a moment of peace. On any given day, you could find a mix of neighbors, former gang members, and local kids gathered there, laughing and talking as Henry looked on with quiet pride. One afternoon, as Henry was repairing a loose board on the porch, Rex showed up with a stack of papers in his hands. "Got a minute?" Rex asked, his tone unusually serious. Henry set down his hammer and motioned for Rex to sit. "What's on your mind?" Rex handed him the papers. "I've been working on something. A proposal for a community center. A place where kids can go to stay out of trouble, where people can get job training and support." Henry flipped through the pages, his expression thoughtful. The proposal was well organized and detailed, a testament to how much effort Rex had put into it. "This is impressive, Rex," he said. "What do you need from me?" Rex hesitated, then said, "I was hoping you'd look it over, maybe give me some feedback. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me present it to the city council." Henry smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You've come a long way, Rex. I'd be honored to help." The presentation to the city council was a nerve-wracking experience for Rex. He wasn't used to speaking in front of an audience, let alone a room full of officials. But with Henry by his side, he found the courage to tell his story and explain his vision for the community center. The council members listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. When the presentation was over, the room erupted into applause. One council member, a woman named Maria, stood up and addressed Rex directly. "Your story is powerful, and your proposal is exactly what this community needs. I'll do everything I can to make sure it's approved." Rex was stunned, his usual confidence giving way to disbelief. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. As they left the council chambers, Rex turned to Henry. "I couldn't have done this without you." Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the hard part, Rex. I just pointed you in the right direction." The approval of the community center marked a turning point for the neighborhood. Construction began within weeks, and the project became a symbol of the community's resilience and determination. People from all walks of life came together to contribute. Some volunteered their time, others donated materials or funds, and everyone offered their support. On the day the community center opened, the neighborhood gathered for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Rex stood at the front, flanked by Henry and Tommy. As he cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted into cheers, their faces alight with hope and pride. Henry watched from the sidelines, his heart full. He had never sought recognition or applause, but seeing the joy on people's faces was reward enough. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, the choices he had made, and the lives he had touched. It hadn't been an easy road, but it had been worth every step. As the celebration continued, Henry found a quiet corner to sit and reflect. Martha joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You should be proud," she said, her voice warm. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Henry shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "It happened because people were ready to change. I just gave them a little nudge." Martha laughed softly. "You're too humble, Henry. But that's part of what makes you so special." Henry looked out at the bustling crowd, his gaze soft. "I don't know about special, but I do know that this is enough." And for the first time in years, Henry felt truly at peace. The grand opening of the community center marked not just a milestone for Rex, Tommy, and Henry but also a profound turning point for the neighborhood. Over the weeks that followed, the center became a hub of activity, buzzing with energy and possibility. Children flocked to the after-school programs, local residents attended workshops and training sessions, and even some of the former gang members found themselves volunteering, eager to contribute to the transformation. Henry, though content to step back and let others take the spotlight, couldn't deny the satisfaction he felt watching it all unfold. He spent most mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and nodding a quiet greeting to the stream of people who passed by on their way to the center. More often than not, someone would stop to thank him or share a piece of good news. One morning, Tommy arrived, his face lit with excitement. "Henry, you've got to come to the center this afternoon," he said, practically bouncing on his heels. "What's the occasion?" Henry asked, raising an eyebrow. Tommy grinned. "We're hosting a career day, and some of the kids asked if you'd speak. They said they want to hear your story." Henry hesitated. Public speaking wasn't exactly his forte, and he wasn't sure what he could say that would resonate with a group of teenagers. "I don't know, Tommy," he said slowly. "Maybe someone else would be better for the job." Tommy shook his head. "No way. You're the one who inspired all of this. They want to hear from you, Henry. Trust me, it'll mean a lot to them." Henry sighed, unable to resist Tommy's earnest enthusiasm. "All right," he said at last. "I'll be there." That afternoon, Henry arrived at the community center to find the gymnasium packed with students, parents, and volunteers. The career day had drawn an impressive turnout, with booths lining the walls showcasing various professions: firefighters, nurses, small business owners, and more. Tommy met Henry at the entrance, guiding him to a seat near the front. "You'll be speaking after Rex," he whispered. "Just tell them about your life. Be yourself." Henry nodded, though he still felt a twinge of nerves. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but standing in front of a crowd to talk about himself felt strangely daunting. Rex took the stage first, his confident demeanor a far cry from the man he had been just months ago. He spoke candidly about his journey, how he had fallen into a life of crime, the mistakes he had made, and the turning point that had set him on a new path. "I didn't think I deserved a second chance," Rex said, his voice steady. "But someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's why I'm here today, because if I can change, so can anyone." The audience erupted into applause as Rex stepped down, and Henry realized it was his turn. Tommy gave him an encouraging pat on the back, and Henry rose to his feet, gripping his cane for support. As he walked to the stage, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. He cleared his throat, taking a moment to steady himself before speaking. "My name is Henry," he began, his voice calm but firm. "And I've lived a long life. A life full of challenges, mistakes, and lessons. I spent many years in the military, traveling to places I never imagined I'd see and doing things I can't always explain. When I retired, I thought I'd left all of that behind. But life has a way of reminding you that some battles don't end when you take off the uniform." He paused, glancing at the faces in the crowd. "I've seen a lot of pain in this world, but I've also seen resilience. I've seen people rise from the darkest places to create something better for themselves and their communities. And that's what I see here today. A community that's come together to make a difference." Henry's voice softened. "Change isn't easy. It takes courage and hard work. But it's worth it. Because when you choose to do what's right, even when it's hard, you make the world a little better, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you." The room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began, slow at first, then growing into a standing ovation. Henry nodded his thanks, his heart full. As he returned to his seat, Tommy leaned over and whispered, "You nailed it." Over the months that followed, the community center continued to thrive. New programs were introduced, partnerships with local businesses flourished, and the sense of unity in the neighborhood deepened. Henry became a quiet fixture at the center, always willing to lend a hand or offer advice when needed. One day, a young woman named Kayla approached him. She was a high school senior with a shy smile and big dreams. "Mr. Henry," she said, clutching a notebook to her chest, "can I talk to you?" "Of course," Henry replied, motioning for her to sit. Kayla hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking about joining the military after I graduate. My family doesn't really understand why, but I want to make a difference, like you did." Henry studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The military can teach you a lot," he said. "Discipline, resilience, how to work as part of a team. But it's not an easy path, Kayla. You have to be sure it's what you want." "I am," she said firmly. "I want to serve my country and help people." Henry nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Then you'll do just fine. But remember, no matter where life takes you, the most important thing is to stay true to yourself." Kayla smiled, her confidence growing. "Thank you, Mr. Henry. That means a lot." Meanwhile, Rex had taken on a new role as the unofficial leader of the community center. His transformation had inspired others to step up, and he often found himself mentoring younger men who were trying to turn their lives around. One evening, as Rex was locking up the center, he spotted Henry sitting on a bench outside. "Hey, Henry," he said, walking over. "What are you doing out here?" "Just thinking," Henry replied, a faint smile on his lips. "About how far this place has come." Rex sat down beside him, nodding. "It's incredible, isn't it? Feels like a different world." "That's because it is," Henry said. "And you had a big part in making it happen." Rex looked down, his expression humble. "I couldn't have done it without you, Henry. You showed me there was another way." Henry placed a hand on Rex's shoulder. "You made the choice, Rex. And that's what matters." As the seasons changed, so did the neighborhood. New families moved in, old tensions faded, and the sense of community only grew stronger. Henry continued to play his quiet but vital role, offering wisdom and support whenever it was needed. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, Martha joined him with 2 cups of tea. They sipped in comfortable silence, the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. "You've done a lot for this neighborhood, Henry," Martha said after a while. "More than anyone else could have." Henry shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "It wasn't just me, Martha. Everyone played a part." Martha placed a hand on his arm. "Maybe. But you were the spark that lit the fire." Henry didn't respond, but deep down he knew she was right. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel the pride he had earned. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry leaned back in his chair, his heart full. He had lived a long and complicated life, but sitting here now, surrounded by a community he had helped rebuild, he felt at peace. And he knew that this was his legacy, not medals or accolades, but the lives he had touched and the hope he had inspired. The community center became the heart of the neighborhood, a place where dreams were nurtured and lives were transformed. From morning to evening, its halls were filled with laughter, determination, and the steady hum of progress. For Henry, the transformation was a quiet triumph. He didn't need recognition, just the knowledge that the people around him were finding their way. One day, as Henry was planting flowers in his front yard, a familiar face approached. It was Marcus, the teenager Tommy had mentored. Now taller and more self-assured, Marcus carried a folder in his hands and wore a wide grin. "Mr. Henry," Marcus said, his voice filled with excitement, "I got in." Henry straightened up, brushing dirt from his hands. "Got in where?" Marcus handed him the folder, his grin widening. Inside was an acceptance letter from a prestigious university, offering him a full scholarship to study engineering. "I never thought this would happen," Marcus said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But Tommy encouraged me to apply, and now, here I am." Henry smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You earned this, Marcus. Don't ever forget that." Marcus nodded, his eyes shining. "Thank you. For everything you've done for me and for this neighborhood. I wouldn't be here without people like you." Henry patted him on the shoulder. "Go make us proud, Marcus. You've got a bright future ahead of you." At the community center, Rex was tackling his next big project, a mentorship program aimed at helping young people find their passions and set goals for their futures. The program paired teenagers with community leaders, small business owners, and volunteers who could guide them through the challenges of growing up. One evening, Rex approached Henry with an idea. "You should be a mentor," Rex said, his tone serious. Henry chuckled, shaking his head. I think I'm better suited for the sidelines, Rex. Rex wasn't having it. Come on, Henry. You've got more wisdom in your little finger than most people learn in a lifetime. These kids need someone like you. Henry hesitated, then sighed. All right, I'll give it a shot. But don't blame me if they get bored listening to an old man ramble. Rex laughed. Trust me, Henry. They'll be hanging on every word. Henry's first mentee was a boy named Liam, a quiet teenager with a knack for fixing things. Liam's family had fallen on hard times, and he often spent his afternoons tinkering with old appliances to help make ends meet. When he met Henry, he was shy and unsure of himself, but Henry saw potential in him right away. What do you like about fixing things? Henry asked during their first meeting. Liam shrugged, avoiding eye contact. I don't know. It just makes sense to me. Machines don't judge you. They just work, or they don't. Henry nodded, understanding the boy's perspective. You know, Liam, being able to fix things is a valuable skill. It means you can take something broken and make it useful again. Not everyone can do that. Liam glanced up, a flicker of pride in his eyes. You really think so? I know so, Henry said firmly. And I think you've got a talent worth building on. Over the weeks that followed, Henry and Liam worked together on various projects, from repairing bicycles to restoring an old radio. Henry encouraged Liam to think about what he wanted for his future, and slowly but surely, Liam began to open up. One day, Liam surprised Henry with an announcement. I've decided what I want to do, he said, his voice filled with determination. I want to be an engineer. I want to design things that help people. Henry smiled, his chest swelling with pride. That's a noble goal, Liam. And I have no doubt you'll achieve it. As Liam grew more confident, the mentorship program flourished. Other teenagers joined, inspired by the success stories of Marcus, Tommy, and others who had turned their lives around. The community center became a beacon of hope, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even local media. One afternoon, a journalist showed up at the center, eager to write a feature on its impact. As she interviewed volunteers, parents, and students, one name kept coming up: Henry. Intrigued, the journalist approached Henry as he sat on the porch, watching the activity unfold. Mr. Henry, she said, introducing herself. I'm writing a story about the community center, and everyone I've spoken to says you're the reason it exists. Would you mind answering a few questions? Henry shifted uncomfortably, not used to being in the spotlight. I'm not sure there's much to say about me, he replied. The real story is the people here, their hard work, their determination. The journalist smiled. With all due respect, Mr. Henry, I think you're selling yourself short. From what I've heard, you've had a profound impact on this community. People look up to you. Henry sighed, then nodded. All right, I'll answer your questions. But keep the focus on the center, not me. Over the course of the interview, Henry shared bits of his story, his military service, his decision to retire in the neighborhood, and his role in guiding Rex, Tommy, and others toward a better path. He spoke humbly, always emphasizing the collective effort that had brought about the neighborhood's transformation. When the article was published a week later, it sparked a wave of attention. Titled "The Quiet Hero of Maple Street," it painted a picture of Henry as a man whose wisdom and kindness had inspired a community to rebuild itself. Though the spotlight made Henry uncomfortable, he couldn't deny the pride he felt when he saw the smiles on the faces of his neighbors. As the years passed, the community center became a model for others across the region. Its programs expanded to include everything from financial literacy workshops to mental health counseling, and its impact continued to ripple outward. Henry, now well into his 80s, remained a steady presence. Though his body wasn't as strong as it once was, his mind and spirit were as sharp as ever. He still mentored young people, offered advice to Rex and Tommy, and tended to his beloved garden. One crisp autumn morning, Henry received a visit from Kayla, the young woman who had decided to join the military. Now wearing a crisp uniform, Kayla stood on his porch, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mr. Henry," she said, saluting him playfully. "I just got back from basic training, and I wanted to thank you. Your advice meant the world to me." Henry smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You've done well, Kayla. I'm proud of you. Kayla handed him a small, framed photo. It showed her standing with her training unit, a determined look on her face. I thought you might like this, she said. Henry accepted the photo, his eyes misting slightly. Thank you, Kayla. I'll treasure it. That evening, as Henry sat on his porch watching the sunset, he reflected on his life. He thought of the choices he had made, the battles he had fought, and the lives he had touched. He thought of the young people who had found their way because of his guidance, and the community that had flourished around him. He knew his time was growing shorter, but he felt no regret. He had lived a life of purpose, one defined not by accolades or wealth but by the impact he had made on others. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in a warm golden light, Henry felt a deep sense of peace. He had done what he could. He had made a difference. And that, he thought, was enough.